I've never shared this story publicly before. The day I died, I saw something that forever changed me. Not just a light, not just angels, but a message meant only for me. I still remember the exact moment it happened. The sky over the Vatican hung low with clouds, like heaven itself was holding its breath. Pope Francis had just passed away, and the world was watching us, the cardinals gathering for the conclave. But I wasn't supposed to be among them. At least, that's what I believed. My name is Luis Antonio. I grew up in the slums of Manila with nothing but prayers and empty pockets. Now I stood in the holiest place on earth, feeling like I didn't belong. That morning, as I crossed the Vatican courtyard alone, something caught my eye. A small wooden box, sitting on a cold marble bench. It wasn't there moments earlier. No guards nearby, no footprints in the rain-soaked ground. Just this box, waiting for me. I approached slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs. When I opened it, my hands began to shake. Inside, resting on a piece of linen cloth, was a rosary. Not just any rosary, my rosary. The very same one I had clung to during the darkest nights of my childhood, when gunshots echoed outside our tin roof home. I hadn't seen it in over 40 years. It was impossible. This rosary had disappeared when I was a teenager. The beads were worn exactly as I remembered, the cross slightly chipped where I had dropped it once while running from neighborhood bullies. As I held it, a flood of memories washed over me. My mother's voice came back to me. She would kneel beside me by candlelight and whisper, "If ever you lose your way, Luis, let your rosary find you again." But how had it found its way here? Now? Just hours before the most sacred election on earth? What I didn't know then was that this broken rosary wasn't just a reminder of my past. It was about to change everything. You see, behind the closed doors of the Vatican, forces were already moving. Some divine, some not. And somehow, this quiet man from the slums of Manila, me, was about to be placed at the center of it all. I don't talk about my childhood often. To the other cardinals, I was just the soft-spoken Filipino who smiled easily and rarely interrupted. But my silence held decades of storms. Born in the worst slums of Manila, I grew up with sirens as my lullabies. Hunger greeted me each morning. My mother cleaned houses for pennies. My father disappeared when I was 8. Faith was the only thing we never lost. At 15, I entered seminary, not because I dreamed of wearing fancy robes, but because a kind nun once looked me in the eyes and said, "You are not invisible to God." It was the first kindness I had known outside my home. From that moment, I dedicated my life to service. Not ambition, not politics, just people. Over the years, I buried victims of typhoons, baptized orphans, and washed the feet of drug addicts whose wounds made other priests turn away. I believed in a church that bent low, not climbed high. But this rosary, it shook something deep inside me. Back in my Vatican room, I placed it on my nightstand and sat in silence for over an hour. Who had returned it? Was this a coincidence, a setup, or something truly divine? I whispered prayers but found no answers. Just one persistent feeling in my chest. This means something. That evening, the first round of general congregation began. The world didn't see what happened inside those walls. Alliances forming. Preferences whispered in Latin behind closed doors. Names were rising, some expected, some surprising. Mine wasn't on most lists. I didn't campaign. I barely spoke. And yet, I began noticing glances in my direction. A nod from a cardinal I'd never met. A lingering handshake. An unexpected smile. Something was shifting. Then, a sealed envelope appeared under my door. No name, no markings, just the same linen paper that had lined the rosary box. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single sentence in delicate handwriting. Relics never return by accident. They return to remind the faithful. The world is about to be rewritten. I sank onto my bed breathless. Who sent this? Was someone watching me? Or was it truly something from above? That night, I barely slept. The rosary rested beneath my pillow, just as it had when I was a child, afraid of the dark and the gunfire outside. But this time, it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was purpose. Questions circled endlessly. Why now? Who left it? Was this a test or a calling? I rose before dawn and walked alone through the empty basilica. Moonlight filtered through stained glass, casting colored shadows across the marble floor. I knelt before the altar and prayed, not for the papacy, but for discernment, for humility, for the strength to surrender to whatever was coming. I prayed not as a cardinal, but as the barefoot boy who once believed God could hear him even from the gutter. By the time the final vote was read, my name had appeared 12 times, more than any other. Still not a majority, but closer. Back in my chamber, I found a new message waiting on the bed, not slid under the door, but placed directly on my pillow. This time, a drawing. A simple sketch of a dove descending into a heart made of thorns. No words. I stared at it for minutes. Then came a knock. It was Cardinal Miller, one of the senior electors, and a man known for his rigid stance. "We need to talk," he said bluntly. I followed him down the hallway into a private room where 5 other cardinals waited. They sat me down. The oldest spoke first. "Luis, do you know why your name keeps appearing?" I shook my head. The man leaned forward. "Because the church doesn't need a ruler. It needs a shepherd." My throat closed. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being prepared. I sat in that small room with the 5 cardinals. Their eyes were calm, firm, not coercive, but expectant. I listened as one by one they shared. "It's not about popularity," one said. "It's about who carries peace when he enters a room," said another. Then the quietest one added, "We've prayed, we've watched, and the Spirit keeps pointing." I shook my head. "I am not the one. I never imagined this." "You didn't have to," Cardinal Muller replied. "God imagined it for you." His words struck me like a bell ringing through the cathedral of my soul. But still, I couldn't accept it. That night, I returned to the basilica after curfew. I collapsed to my knees, not in fear, but in surrender. Not to power, but to purpose. "I am not worthy," I whispered. "I am not strong enough." And for the first time in years, I asked for a sign. When I returned to my room, everything was as I'd left it, except for one thing. The Broken Rosary was gone. In its place sat a new one, pure white beads, untouched, and a note folded neatly beneath it. Just one sentence. "You were never alone." I fell to my knees. The next morning, the final vote began. I entered the chapel with no fear, only stillness. And when the ballots were read, my name was called again and again until it was enough. White smoke would rise soon, but before it did, I turned to the empty air and whispered, "Not my will, but yours." The atmosphere outside the Sistine Chapel was electric. Cameras from every continent pointed toward the chimney. Thousands filled St. Peter's Square, pilgrims, tourists, nuns, clutching rosaries. The sky was cloudy, but hope burned in every face. Then it happened. White smoke. A cheer erupted like thunder. Bells rang out. The world held its breath. Inside, I knelt once more. One by one, my brothers approached and kissed my ring, already calling me Holy Father. But I couldn't stop thinking about that white rosary. Who had placed it there? Had anyone truly? Or was it heaven itself? I was guided into a private chamber where I was asked the question every new pope must answer. "By what name shall you be called?" I closed my eyes. I thought of the streets of Manila, of my mother, of the children whose feet I had washed, of the broken and forgotten. "Francis II," I said, not to replace him, but to walk where he walked, barefoot. The silence was profound. Then the moment came. I stepped onto the balcony. The world waited. As the red curtain drew back, the crowd fell silent. And then they saw me, modest, bareheaded, my eyes red from weeping, hands trembling slightly. Before uttering a word, I lifted the rosary, not as a symbol of victory, but as a vow of service. In that single gesture, millions around the world wept. But what the cameras didn't capture was what I felt inside. As I clutched the rosary, I felt the tiniest crack beneath one bead. It was the Broken Rosary after all, just whole again. In the days that followed, headlines filled every newspaper on earth. The Filipino Pope, a shepherd from the slums, Francis II, the Pope who came with a broken rosary. Some celebrated, others were confused. But in the forgotten corners of the world, something awakened. In a flooded village in Bangladesh, a mother lit a candle and whispered, "He looks like us." In a prison in Venezuela, inmates watched my speech and wept in silence. In the streets of Tondo, where I had once begged for bread, a small boy ran barefoot through mud, holding up a rosary made of plastic beads, smiling. I refused the golden throne. I slept in a plain room, ate simple meals, and every morning before any meeting, I knelt beside my bed and prayed with the rosary that had returned to me as mysteriously as my calling. I never spoke of it publicly, but those closest to me would sometimes hear me whisper before entering crowds, "Let them not see me. Let them see the one who sent me." And they did. In the months and years that followed, everything changed. I visited war zones without guards. I washed the feet of women who had been trafficked. I embraced children dying of diseases in countries no one reported on. And always, always, that rosary was with me, not around my neck but in my hand, held tightly, as if to remind myself that the weight of the church was never meant to be carried alone. Years passed. I never grew distant from the people. I aged with grace, wrinkles deepening not from stress, but from smiling. The world came to know me not as a ruler, but as a servant. One morning, the Vatican awoke in silence. I had passed peacefully in my sleep. No fanfare, just a breeze through the curtains and sunlight spilling onto the floor where my shoes sat, dusty and humble. Beside my bed was the white rosary, one bead missing. As news broke, millions gathered in prayer, not in mourning, but in gratitude. In Manila, church bells rang 83 times. In Nairobi, children sang my name. In Buenos Aires, strangers embraced under banners that read, "The Pope who remembered the forgotten." But one thing puzzled those who entered my room that morning. A note, written in my own hand, folded inside my desk drawer. It read, "It was never about the throne. It was about the knees." In a small village chapel in the Philippines that same day, a little boy walked to the altar. He held an old, cracked rosary, one bead missing, found in a wooden box by the door. No one knew who left it, but when he held it, he smiled and whispered, "I know this prayer. It feels like it never left." And so ends my story, not just of a pope, but of a soul who chose humility over power. If this touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We bring you stories that don't just entertain, they awaken the spirit. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't the ones written in history books, but the ones whispered in hearts that dare to hope.